Good morning. All right. So I was going to do this, but I think I might do 30 minutes of karaoke instead, because that was a lot of fun. How many people have camped at a national park before? Yeah, all right. That's everybody. That's great. How many people have heard of Recreation.gov? All right. Cool. Very cool. How many people have used Recreation.gov? Okay. Cool. Hopefully there's more people can raise their hands after this. So, my name's Martin Folkoff. So I'm a chief technologist at Booz Allen. And my day job is as an SRE on the Recreation.gov program. All right, so for the folks that aren't completely aware, Recreation.gov is really a kind of a one-stop place where you can get reservations for campsites, permits, tours. There are lotteries, there are park passes, anything you want to do to interact with our federal lands, Recreation.gov is for you. There is another side of Recreation.gov, which is for the public sector who wants to manage those reservations, manage the lands behind it. So that's another part that not all of us get to see, but it's a complicated part, and it's necessary to make sure that everybody is utilizing the lands well. So to get some sense of the scale here, we currently have over 100,000 campsites on the site. We do 50 tours, over 40 permits, 20 passes, and that's continually growing every day as more come on. And all these things come from 12 different federal agencies. So it's really kind of a broad group of people that are involved in this project, and it's exciting to get to work with all of them. The other thing to note here is that it's a bit of a unique platform in that none of these agencies paid anything for this site to operate. Booz Allen hosts and builds the site, and we make money when you all reserve from us. Bit of a unique proposition, very different than what Booz Allen is used to building, used to how they work. So that's been a whole new adventure for us. All right, so what's so new about Recreation.gov? So July 2017, we officially began development of this totally from scratch. Brand new, greenfield, really, everything a developer wants to hear. Go do exactly what you need to do to build the best website you can possibly build. So very, very exciting for us. No legacy code to worry about, whatever cloud resources we need within reason. We kind of were able to do that. And so we spent a year and a half working through building this thing, working closely with end users, working closely with the government, making sure that we were building the right thing in the right ways. And then October 1st, last October, we did a cutover, basically swapped DNS from the old implementation to our implementation, and we were off and running. So what does that look like now? We're pretty happy with where we've come so far. We have done about over 1 million transactions so far, almost 4 million camping reservations, almost 1 million ticket sales. We are responsible for some of these other kind of big name events like the National Christmas Tree Lighting, the National Easter Egg Roll. And I mean, when I say we're responsible for it, I mean like we're really responsible for it. Our developers go out with, we have our own app that we go and scan everybody that comes into the parks and stuff. So definitely a cool, rewarding experience, really getting, seeing all the hard work in action. making sure everyone has a good time at these really important national events. The other thing that we do is we've done 8 Yosemite sails, and I'll kind of talk about that in a little bit and why that's kind of interesting to note as well. And then finally, we're at the very end of getting our FSMA moderate ATO right now. So that's also super exciting for us, because if anyone's gone through an ATO process, they know how long and challenging it is, but we've worked really hard to make that happen. Okay, so that's where we are. So getting into what I kind of want to accomplish today is my BuzzFeed top 5 list here. Something hopefully folks can take away from. Not new ideas per se, just I wanted to make sure that I kind of give examples of how Recreation.gov is living up to these themes or these kind of goals that a lot of us have, a lot of us talk about all the time. So we want to see how we kind of approached it. So creating strong domain boundaries, letting developers own their own services, investing in distributed solutions, know your service limits, and observability over monitoring. So I'll give examples of each of those. All right, so jumping into it. Creating strong domain boundaries. So this is really a microservice slide, right? So doing domain-driven design to help break apart this really complex area. Recreation.gov is really a vast pile of requirements that are really difficult to for one person to understand. It's really impossible for one person to really know all the different rules, all the different scenarios that go into this. And so it's really important for us to organize how we approach this, both from a people perspective, but also from a technology perspective. And so, hopefully you kind of get a feel for this as I continue to talk through here. But we are really careful to make sure that we try not to leak domains together. So the camping domain, as you can imagine, is a very different domain than the passes domain, right? There are lots of rules in camping around how many nights you can stay, how many times you can stay in a month, making sure that you don't overbook or double book or anything like that. These are hard problems that passes doesn't need to know anything about. And so, by enabling, from a technology perspective, this independence, you really get an opportunity to be very aggressive from an agile perspective in making feature changes to either or without making mistakes that bleed over into a domain that you never intended. This is kind of an overview. These aren't exactly the domains that we use, but it's a good start. All right, so now that we have some ideas about the different domains, who works in these different domains, really, we made an emphasis that development teams were going to be king here. So if you are a developer within one of these domains, you're an expert, right? And so the development teams that I'm referring to here really consist of full stack engineers. There's one tech lead, and depending on the features or the scale of what you were working on, potentially we had a dedicated front-end engineer. But that's really the makeup of the team. We kind of refer to these as autonomous agile teams. That's the Booz Allen way to say it. And then each development team can own multiple domains, and then of course within each domain you can have as many services as you feel is going to be required to solve the problem effectively. SRE, security, UX, UI, there's a group of shared resources that span all the domains, and we kind of go around and help when necessary. depending on the feature or depending on the risk that goes into that particular domain. And then for your end user facing domains or domains that have a lot of public interest, we generally have a product owner as well to help dictate the backlogs, priorities, all that kind of stuff. And that product owner is typically a government representative. Okay. I should mention that the logistics for some of the project was kind of interesting in that we have different domains built in different geographic locations. So we have teams out in Denver and also teams in Charleston, South Carolina as well. And if you're in geography, then you own a particular domain. We don't kind of mix and match domains across geographies. All right, so cool. So that's who builds it. Now, where do these services run? I think it'll probably help us start from the top, and we'll work our way down. So there's really 3 ways you can interact with Recreation.gov. One is through RIDB 1.0, which is it's a government-mandated API interface for you all to interact with camping inventory, or really all the inventory that we maintain, or that the government has in general, as well as get information about how it's utilized. If you want to do any research or anything like that, that's available to utilize. Of course, there's the Recreation.gov web client. If you go to Chrome, type in Recreation.gov, it's all React-based. Hopefully people enjoy the UX UI experience. We worked hard on that one. And then there's a mobile app. Currently there's only iOS. We're working on the Android version, so that'll be out eventually. But your request is going to start in one of those 3 clients. Everything gets filtered through CloudFront, CloudFront and WAF. So from there, we'll use Route 53 to do some geo-latency determination of which data center is most appropriate for you to go to. And once that's kind of situated, we'll send you to a distributed firewall, which, if you get a thumbs up from there, we'll send you to EKS. We do some Lambda stuff, but it's a little bit rarer. And it's typically not on any of the critical paths that we maintain. I'll also note that all of the microservices that we build are in Go. So we've been waiting for an excuse to not use Go, but so far it's really been super effective for us. So we've had a really good experience there. Okay, so once you've kind of hit the EKS platform, then you're probably going to need some data. So if you're interacting with any kind of transaction or reservation of any kind, you're probably going to hit Cassandra. And the reason we use Cassandra is really because it provides a really nice way to enable us to do active-active regions. So it does a really good job of making sure that we have consistent data across regions. There are lots of tricks that need to go in to ensure that if someone in New York tries to buy the same campsite as someone in Los Angeles at the same time, they don't both show up and try and camp on the same plot of land. So that does get tricky, and so I'm happy to talk into detail about that after, but something to kind of note. But otherwise, it's been great. If you're just doing some searching on the site, want to peruse what's out there, that's primarily going to be Solar. We do Redis for a lot of the caching that goes on. And then we have some relational databases as well that handle reporting and business intelligence. It might not be that surprising to folks, but a lot of the national parks don't have internet service. So the only way that they really interact with the site is by fax. So we send hundreds of faxes every morning across the United States with who's going to show up that day. All right, so I think some of the big takeaways here are, we really strove to not have any single points of failure in the whole system. And so we have multiple regions, multiple nodes, multiple pods. All of our databases are distributed. We spend a lot of time making sure that there's not any one thing that can cause a catastrophic event. And so that's kind of a big design decision that we made very early in the project. I'd also encourage folks to keep in mind supporting systems like DNS NTP, your direct connects, all that kind of stuff. Those should all be distributed as well, or at least have tested failovers. All right, so that's where the services run. We talked about microservices a little bit, talked about distributed systems a little bit. Those things they can be really effective, but they're not free. There's a lot of complexity, a lot of investment that needs to go in to make those things production grade, so to speak. And so as you kind of add more and more components to the site, you get into the Death Star models, and people have kind of seen the Netflixes and the Amazons of the world and how everything connects to everything. And especially when those things are built on distributed systems, it gets even more complicated. So it's kind of interesting and scary how quickly our site started to look like those. And so we had to get fairly clever about how things can talk to one another, and why they need to talk to one another. All right. So here's some kind of high-level overviews of if you're a developer working on a microservice, this is the way you would talk to another service if you had to. Best case scenario, you don't have to leave your domain, but if you have to, then you can use REST. Everyone's kind of familiar with that. It's a bit slow at some of the scale that we work on, so we try and avoid REST whenever possible. But if you need something cheap and easy, that's available for folks. We spend most of our time communicating through gRPC, at least for synchronous calls. We found that it is much more performant. I think the thing to be a little bit careful of is you need the infrastructure to support it. And it's, you need a little bit of a different mindset on how HTTP2 works and all that kind of stuff. So it's something to keep in mind, but it has been successful. SNS SQS for anything eventually consistent. Of course, the big downside with these kinds of things is that you got to manage a DLQ, which if anyone has to do that, it can be kind of a frustrating experience. And then, how eventual is eventual, so you kind of get into that game. So has anyone used AWS SWF before? Okay, good, cool. So I don't want to necessarily market this tool for AWS, but the idea of AWS SWF is really good. So we've had a lot of good experience with this particular design pattern. Of kind of utilizing a system that manages state, or it really is a state tracker for any given task, any arbitrary task. And so kind of what I mean by this is if ideally you don't end up in a position where you have a workflow that spans multiple different domains and involves multiple different services, and you want to kind of do domain-driven design so that you don't end up in that position, but inevitably you probably will. So this is a Band-Aid to that, in my opinion. It's a really nice way to kind of give a service a task to do, and then this thing will manage the state around that, and then all the services can poll, waiting for things that they're supposed to do for that particular task. And AWS SWF will kind of manage who needs to do what at what time. And if anything fails or anything like that, it'll retry. The UI has a lot to be, imagined for, but otherwise it's been very reliable. For folks that aren't on AWS or don't want to get involved with kind of this particular version of it, Uber has an open source version called Cadence. Which I recommend folks take a look at. It's almost effectively the same thing. So, okay, that's some of that. All right, so how do the services get deployed? This is, I think, hopefully the most appropriate for this conference anyway. This is the show me the DevOps slide. So some takeaways here are we do everything in trunk-based development. That enables us to be very aggressive in making sure we're getting stuff out the door, getting stuff into production. But otherwise, you're pretty typical CI/CD experience. You do feature development on a branch, you merge it into your dev or your master branch, and that will automatically go out to the dev environment. And at that point, development, the tech lead or whoever owns the technical part of that domain will get to decide when it goes to the other environments. And so they can go and push their Docker images from the dev environment to the test environment to the production environment whenever they want. And really what all that they're doing is copying images between ECRs. And that's really the only way that our AWS environments overlap in any sense. And this works for just about everything that we do. We do UI deployments like this. Any of our CloudFormation we do like this. Obviously the Kubernetes stuff. We follow the same pattern for everything. And so I should note that we do this a lot. So since October, we've deployed to production over 1,300 times, which is about 10 times a day-ish. And then we do dev 40,000 times, and then test we've done 20,000 times. Those are some fun numbers. Okay, so what does this look like from a developer's perspective? They can basically go into Jenkins. They'll select what kind of service they want to deal with. We'll select Kubernetes here. And then we'll select the camping service. And then there's sensible defaults here, so you don't have to know everything that's going on. But if you click build, you'll get the latest version of whatever was in the previous environment. Or you can select your own very specific Git hash or whatever you want, anything that's available in the previous environment, you can deploy that. You can do rollbacks, whatever. You can select your specific region that you want to deploy into. If you have a different cluster for some reason, you can do that. You can play games with your database migration files. All that's up to the developer. It's their responsibility to make good decisions here. All right, so that's how developers would deploy. The other thing that we try and work with developers on is scaling. So I mentioned the Yosemite releases a little bit ago. So the interesting part about Yosemite releases is the release inventory every 15th of the month at 10 o'clock. And it's a bit of a rolling window. So around March, they're releasing summer campsites. And if anybody has tried to get a Yosemite reservation, they know how competitive it is. It's kind of a madhouse. Effectively, we have tens of thousands of people show up on the website at 9:55 that start frantically clicking on the buy button. And it really is, we sell out within minutes, and it can be very frustrating if you don't get a campsite, but it is super, super competitive. And so, on the right side, you can see the first graph is kind of our Google Analytics. That spike is very abnormal for us, and this is some of the CPU that we see. And so, really, there's no way we can auto-scale for this. And traditionally, throughout most of the year, we do auto-scaling both in and out, and the developers don't really need to pay attention to what's going on there, except for days like this. And so when domain owners know that they're going to have an event like this go down, they can go in and pre-warm whatever services they need using this kind of workflow. so they can scale up and down depending on whatever load testing or previous historical records we have. And then if you look carefully at the very bottom there, there's a use node pool. For something like Yosemite, we don't want a noisy neighbor problem where you might just end up on a node that has a really busy search service or something like that. And so we take all of the camping-related services and we'll swap them to their own isolated nodes, so we don't do any more multi-tenancy for that time period to avoid potentially unfairness, effectively. Okay. Observability over monitoring. I think I heard this a bunch of times yesterday, so it's cool that this is becoming a popular topic. So I really like this quote. Monitoring tells you whether a system is working. Observability lets you ask why it isn't working, and we took this to heart as a design decision for how we built out our monitoring platform, or our observability platform, I guess. And so that kind of looks like this for us, where we are taking telemetry from every phase of a request's lifecycle and kind of culminating that into places where we can slice and dice. So if you go back to the other slide, or I kind of call this the onion theory, right? So if you're just doing monitoring, you can kind of look at each of the layers, and if one of the layers turns red, okay, you know there's a problem. But it's much more effective to be able to chop up the onion into whatever pieces you need so that you can query or dig into exactly why that particular layer is becoming unhealthy. And so this kind of gives you some perspective on the different layers of the onion, and then how we start to chop up each of those different components or different telemetry that we gather from each of those. All right, yeah, some interesting notes I think is just around Prometheus and logging in general. That's something that we've had tremendous success with. It really enables us to create the small slices and do really effective querying and really effective KPIs on the health of our services. So if folks haven't gotten into Prometheus yet, or any Prometheus-like solutions, I definitely would recommend that. All right. And so one more review of my top 5 list here. So hopefully folks got a little something out of each one of these. And then that's kind of some of my information, as well as a picture of the team that was involved in building this. And so they deserve all the credit. It's been a really fun experience. I'm really excited to talk about this finally with all of you folks. And yeah, thanks for all your time. And I'll be around for any questions all day, hopefully. So thank you.